So now we're reaching chapter 6. Darius has taken over the kingdom. Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. And the other administrators really did not like that. But they knew that Daniel was very much an upstanding person, and so they wouldn't be able to find anything of its own merit to get him in trouble. So they went to the king and they said, "Oh, king, you're so wonderful. You should issue a decree and put it in writing that no one can worship any god except for you for the next 30 days, or shall be thrown into the lion's den." And for some reason, King Darius was like, okay, and then he wrote it down. And because the laws of that time could not just be changed, he had written it down, and thus it was a law and it had to be followed. So of course, Daniel continued praying to God, and he prayed 3 times a day at his home, and he wasn't going to do it in secret. He had always been proud of his faith. He had always been faithful to God outwardly, and he continued to do just that. So then these administrators went to the king and said, "We saw Daniel praying. That's against the law. You have to throw him in the lion's den."
Talk about acting on your envy of somebody, because these people convinced the king to make this law, knowing full well that they could just go to Daniel's house and find him praying to God.
So they come to the king and they say, "You have to throw Daniel in the lion's den because he's been praying 3 times a day and he's paying no attention to your law." And verse 14 says, "When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, 'Remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed.'" So the king had no choice. At this point, he was obviously fond of Daniel. That's why all the administrators were jealous in the first place. And so he had really been caught here by them. So he does order that Daniel be thrown into the lion's den. So that happens. They take him, they seal it up with a stone, and Daniel's in the lion's den overnight. And this is great. When King Darius comes in the morning to see if Daniel is still alive, this is verse 20. He says in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king." The king is fully aware of the power of God, and he's hoping for God to work in the situation, and of course God has. And then, just to wrap up the end of this story, those administrators who, it says they falsely accused Daniel, but they had kind of accurately accused Daniel.
Right. Because they made up.
Right, they made up the law.
Up the law, essentially.
So then they got thrown into the lions and they got eaten immediately. Wah, wah.
So essentially they reaped what they sowed.
Yes. And then finally, the very last thing in the chapter, Darius issues a decree that in every part of the kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions.
So yet again, another king who doesn't directly worship God.
And if you think about the amazing effect that Daniel has had on these multiple kings.
Yes.
He had faith in God, and he declared his faith in God, and he acted in such a way that was worthy of the calling that was on his life. And because of that, all these kings saw the power of God as well. Mm-hmm. And we can assume that people in the kingdom as well, when these decrees were given, that it led other people to God as well.
So the relationship between King Darius and Daniel really moves me, because it inspires me to have that much more confidence in the power of God in front of people. It's almost as if Daniel's reputation precedes him to the point where Darius's affection runs so deep, even though he himself doesn't worship the Lord. So much like in our lives, for people that we care about, and that we hope the best for as well, if they're not Christians or if they don't worship Jesus, yet it's almost like they have a glimmer of faith because we have so much faith. King Darius was so upset when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den that he didn't sleep, and he spent the night fasting. And when the morning came, he ran to the opening of the lion's den to see if Daniel's God had saved him. So I imagine that even though this is a true story, I kind of use that as kind of like a metaphor of like, I have people in my life that aren't walking with God, that they almost have so much faith in my faith that they are like Darius in the sense that there's an opening there for God to work his way in.
Oh, yeah. You know he had faith that God had saved him. When he was
Yeah.
rushing there, hopeful. Absolutely. So that brings us to the end of chapter 6, which is the end of the stories of the book of Daniel. And next up is going to be, we're going to just kind of group together 7 through 12 and talk about his visions a bit and how it ties into the themes of this entire book.
We can think of chapters 7 through 12 like this. God gave Daniel visions about the future and the ability to interpret dreams of others, which we talked about a lot in chapters 1 through 6. He predicted political events of his time, events which occurred in the lifetime of Christ, and events of the end of the world, which are yet to occur. Like the predictions in Ezekiel, Daniel's predictions are clouded in symbolism, so even Daniel didn't understand the meaning of all of his visions. So if Daniel didn't, they're here for us to read and enjoy and try to figure out, but we're not going to try to do that.
But we greatly encourage you to find like a commentary or something like that, because there is a lot of great stuff, and some of this has already happened historically and correlates with historical events. We are not historians and we are not experts in prophecy, so we do encourage you to read a commentary that explains it to you a little bit, because there are some fascinating historical instances.
Yes. We did just want to bring to you our knowledge of 7 through 12, just knowing that it's basically just a record of many of Daniel's visions. More than the author of any other Old Testament book, Daniel gave predictions about how the world will end. So that's why some of these visions can also be a little bit heavy. But just like Cami said, we do encourage you guys to read through it, as we will, and accompany your reading with some commentary. I'm sure there's all sorts of things that you can find on it, and perhaps it's another video that we'll make in the future.
But as far as themes, there are some like overarching themes that fit in with the rest of the chapters that we've already talked about.
For sure.
For example, one of the big themes of this book is that God is in control. A lot of the prophecies and visions have to do with wars and conquering lands and leaders and government and things like that. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of strife in there. And some of the verses even spell it out, like, this is going to be a hard time for God's people. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the whole vision and you get to the end, God always wins in the end. And God is in control, and when you are faithful, it says in the last verse of the whole book that you will receive your inheritance from God. And that can give you a hope that nothing else really can, that God is in control, and no matter what happens in history, no matter the wars, no matter whatever's going on in your life, God is in control, and in the end, that's really all that makes a difference.
Yeah.
And that's very apparent in Daniel's life as well.
Yes, I agree with all the things that you just said. Cami reminded me earlier that chapter 9 is actually Daniel's prayer about God's people. So it's not so much a vision
But it ties into a vision that Jeremiah had, which
Yeah, so we
talked
referenced
about a
Jeremiah's
70-year period of desolation for Jerusalem, and he realizes that they're coming towards the end of that 70-year period. But this is a great prayer that Daniel does. It's super honest. It's a very honest prayer, and he references the sins of Israel, and he includes himself in that. He says "we" most of the time, and he's just asking for God's grace and mercy as this period comes to a close, and God takes them into the next phase that he has for them.
So, if you guys make your way through Daniel and you're feeling a little bit confused, or if you're feeling like it's a lot of information, then just keep reading chapter 12, verse 13. But you go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to meet your inheritance at the end of days. Still, it kind of still fits with everything in the Bible and the message of, meeting up with God at the end of our time. And can be a really heavy subject for some people, but we appreciate you guys joining with us in Daniel. And obviously comment on what you liked about this video. If you liked it, click like, so then that way more videos will pop up in your feed if you want to join us in the Word. And also, if you have questions, if you feel like we missed anything, as we said before, please leave those comments as well. We want as much to be fed by the community as we are trying to be fed with you.
We want to study along with you.
Yeah.
And this is a pretty dense book. There's lots of stuff in it. So obviously we didn't hit every detail, but if you think we missed something important, let us know. We'd love to talk about it with each other and with you guys. And yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Bye.